single woman can become pregnant without sexual intercourse, a concept that in the past was reserved to science fiction. Modern biotechnology offers couples the opportunity to bear a child when all natural means are exhausted. Barring any moral questions related to the procurement of gametes, in the case of a couple, artificial reproductive technology is generally considered a blessing. In such circumstances, we can say that while the natural act of procreating has been circumvented, man and woman continue to exist as persons in communion with each other and with God because of their love for one another and for the unborn child. However, the same cannot be said for single women. When a single woman resorts to biotechnology, she remains on the level of the purely natural order. That is to say, her desire to give birth simply satisfies the physical need to survive and pass on genes to future generations. Indeed, when a single woman attempts to fall pregnant through the artificial technology, she reduces her body from a temple of God to a chamber of incubation. The ecstatic act of bringing forth new life is naturally something that helps a person transcend the confines of the ego. Nevertheless, when we compromise the imago Dei, the image of God, biotechnology leads to the direct opposite of such transcendence and transformation. In our review of the notion of personhood, we have already mentioned that Orthodoxy's vision of the human person focuses on relational existence rather than on natural essence. So it is inconceivable for the Church to acknowledge someone as a person simply because they meet certain physiological or biological parameters. Unfortunately, those interested in pushing biotechnology to new heights have gradually moved away from this position. Indeed, a perspective once very clear and formative for our lives in the Church is now viewed as hampering scientific progress. In order to develop this point further, I would ask you to consider the following. Even if we were to accept the use of artificial ways in the case of couples in the Orthodox Church, we would still have to consider the problem of excess embryos created in the process. Frequently, physicians create many embryos beyond the number that is implanted as a way to prepare for unsuccessful pregnancies and reduce the cost of future efforts. If the woman becomes pregnant, we justifiably celebrate. Yet we also face the dilemma of what to do with the extra embryos. The Church teaches that the embryo is a human person despite its limited biological development and consequently must never be damaged, let alone destroyed. Others, however, argue that the embryo is not a person precisely because of its physical or natural condition and limitation. Some feel that we can only speak of a human person after birth, or when the fetus first moves, or when the embryo develops the first signs of a nervous system. In any case, the desire to overcome physical limitations through the use of biotechnology often obliges us to define personhood according to biology, rather than according to qualities associated with God's existence, namely freedom, love, communion, and sacrifice. Thank you. If we imagine that matters become less convoluted with age, we are surely mistaken. Surely, with the passing of time, human beings form greater and deeper relationships with others and with the environment. As we come to know others more intimately, as we become more attached to them, we gradually perceive their intrinsic value. This is not simply a matter of biological or physiological maturity, but a sign also of spiritual growth. Nonetheless, as we evolve in both body and soul, we encounter numerous health-related problems. Once again, biotechnology offers a prospect and the possibility of overcoming these challenges, but it simultaneously challenges the orthodox understanding of personhood. I skip the rest and I come to the conclusion. As Orthodox Christians, when we refer to the human person, we imagine something far more significant than biological, physiological, or chemical process. According to the Orthodox Church, a human person is someone who has progressed from the image of God to the likeness of God. In other words, a person is someone who seeks to reflect the mode of existence of the persons of the Holy Trinity. As such, the individual is called to enter into communion with God as well as with the rest of creation. Therefore, personhood is fully realized when one participates in the Eucharist, as the body and blood of Christ unite each of us with our Creator and with all those who partake in the Feast of the Feasts. With such a view of personhood, biological, social, and physiological disorders can never limit one's status as a human person. Indeed, such disorders may well limit someone's ability to comprehend and desire a harmonious life in the world, but they cannot completely abolish personhood. According to the Orthodox Church, we cease to be persons when we die spiritually, something that occurs when we become enclosed in its self-concentredness and refuse to love God and neighbor. Our approach to the human person may appear a little too austere to those who are interested in an unfettered application of biotechnology. However, this does not mean that the Orthodox approach prohibits the use of biotechnology when trying to overcome various challenges to health and life. We do not perceive biotechnology as inherently sinful, nor do we believe that medical and scientific progress should be avoided or confined. What is, I suppose, important is to be aware of the motivating factors behind the use of biotechnology in each specific instance. In this way, we can avoid doing good through evil, and consequently feel certain that the use of biotechnology will not be turned into a measure for the misuse or abuse of the human person. And as a sign of thanks for your patience, listening to my long and sometimes maybe boring speech, I have this story that my professor of homiletics told me, late Professor Fundoulis, who passed away in the meantime, may his memory be eternal. He told me a story. The first lecture about homiletics was the following story about a preacher, an Anglican preacher, very famous one, who walked through all the villages in England preaching. And when he arrived to villages, the first thing he did was to ring the bell of the church and to call the people to listen to his sermon. And he went to a village, he rang the bell, and nobody came. He rang the bell again, and repeatedly, and again nobody came. After a while, he saw a person coming from a long distance, walking very slowly, approaching the church. He waited for him. He was a peasant. He sat in the church alone, and he was in the dilemma to preach or not to preach. And he said, let me ask the peasant what he thinks about this. He went to him. He said, what do you think? Should I preach to you? You are the only one who came from the whole village. And the peasant said, well, Father, I don't know. I'm an illiterate peasant. I cannot read. I don't understand things. The only thing I do is to feed my cows. But I know that when I go to feed my cows, and only one cow comes, I do not let her go hungry. You know, the preacher was insulted. He was angry. He said, look, this peasant, what he's talking to me, he's making fun of me. And he came up to the ambo and started his best, and he preached the best sermon he knew, with hands moving and so on, and then he came down. Now, let's see what the peasant says about this sermon. He went again to the peasant, what do you think now about the sermon? He said, I don't know, I'm an illiterate peasant, and the only thing I know is to feed my cows, but you know, Father, when the only cow comes, I do not give all the food that I have for all cows. Thank you.